I'm Alex Loney, an associate professor of classical languages at Wheaton College.
Dr. Alex Loney. Alex, good to see you. Welcome back to Exegetically Speaking.
Yes, good to be here again.
I was on campus last week and we didn't get a chance to connect, so I'm glad we're doing it by Zoom today. Thanks for taking the time.
Of course.
All right, today we're going to talk about Matthew chapter 7. Now, you're going to help me because I'm working on a book on Matthew. So you're going to help me with my writing. And I'm going to footnote you and footnote this particular podcast because I like what we're getting ready to do. Talk to us a little bit about what's the setting of Matthew chapter 7:1, and so, but we're going to be looking at verse 2. But kind of what's going on here in this passage?
All right. Well, we're in the famous Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is giving a lot of his famous teaching that we all look to again and again. And in this passage, we get his statement in Matthew 7, verse 1, that, as is translated in the NIV, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you."
All right, we're actually looking at a wordplay, I guess. I'm trying to think of what to call it. You called it earlier Etymologica, Figura, or something to that effect. Tell us about that.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's a rhetorical device here called the Figura Etymologica, which is a device that uses multiple but different words in close proximity that derive from the same root. Let me give you a couple examples. It works a bit better in Greek for reasons we'll describe, but the bard, Shakespeare, wrote a couple nice examples. "With eager feeding, food doth choke the feeder." Or, this is from Troilus and Cressida. "The Greeks are strong and skillful in their strength, fierce in their skill, and in their fierceness valiant." In those two, you see, say, exact for that first one, which is from Richard II, you get this feed and food that choke the feeder. So 3 different words there on that same root having to do with food and feed.
So you hear that those sounds, they keep coming back to you.
That's right.
It's artful and it's memorable. And I think that's part of the reason that Jesus employs this kind of device is to help his readers just find it to be memorable. But we don't have here food and feeder and such. We have something else. So help us with kind of the sound of it and the meaning of it as well.
All right. So this is really prominent in verse 2. I'll just read the first half of the Greek for us. "En ho ga krimati klinetai krithesesta." So did you hear there that krim, krin, and klithesa? Those are 3 different words there.
Yeah.
Each on the same root, which has to do with judgment in the Greek. What's also interesting about it, right, is that they come one after another. Those 3 words having to do with judgment, there's no words between them, right? Like in that example from Shakespeare, he had to insert feeding food, and then he's got doth choke the feed. Some of these translations, like in the NIV or the KJV, they get a little bit of that because they'll repeat those words, but it's impossible to do this in English because of our fixed word order. So here's how the KJV does that first part. "For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged." So they get judge in there 3 times, but the word judge doesn't come right in succession 3 times. They have to insert ye, our old ye in there, and then ye shall be before the 3rd time we get judged.
And that's just simply a function of how English works, right?
Exactly.
To be good English, you couldn't sort of restate that another way. But you can have great Greek by putting these 3 sounds, 3 words back to back.
Yes, exactly. The second half, he repeats it with this idea of measurement. So again, the NIV will translate as, "And with that measure you use, it will be measured to you." So they only use the word measure there twice.
Yeah.
But here's how it goes. Here's the sound of it in the original. "Kai en ho metro metleta metlethesetai humin."
So you get those 3 meh sounds at the very beginning of those 3 words back to back.
Yes. Yeah. So what's cool about that, I think, here's a little plug for why it's worth learning Greek to read the Bible, is that, this is something that the artistry of it really is only visible and you can only experience and hear it um, if we can dig down into the original text and see that, because for the reasons we said, it's impossible to replicate it in translation.
Right. You say in translation, and it's interesting to me that the NIV uses by which measure you use, because they don't say by which measure you measure, you will be measured. It will be measured to you, or something like that. They don't do that 3 times like the King James does. And that's one of the great things to me, Alex, honestly, about the King James, is that there is kind of an artistry at work in the King James that you don't see in modern translations. But yeah, they're taking out all the ye's and the thous and the such, which probably is helpful. But at the same time, they lose a little bit of that artistry by which judgment you judge, you shall be judged.
Yes,
So you miss that, but there is an artistry there that happens in the text that you do not see in translation.
Absolutely. Yes. Wow. And we were talking a little bit about this before. Like, what do you think, David, is like the reason you would do this? So Jesus goes up on the end. He speaks using this artful form. It's clearly designed with a certain effect and reason.
Yeah.
Maybe it's memorability, right? There's a way that he wants his teaching to have power and to really sink into people's ears. When it resonates this way, when it has this oral quality, it seems much more likely that it could endure.
Mm-hmm. Well, you and I, Alex, because we're modern people, we're literate. Most of us in the West are literate. We encounter these things primarily in a text that we're reading, and we're saying it to ourselves in our heads as we're reading it to some degree. But for those who first encountered these texts and heard them, they heard, at least initially, Jesus say them, let's say. But then after Matthew writes these words, they're going to hear it read over and over and over again to them in the synagogue or the synagogue/church. And so it's primarily what you hear and not so much what you see. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's right. Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that takes it to a different part of our brains, I think. And it does make it more memorable. It does make it more impactful. I like the way you said that. There's more impact when you hear it that way. These are not weak sounding ideas. You got the almost in English a KR, crimata, crimetai, crinete, crithesiste. You've got some strong sounds there.
Yeah, definitely.
And I do think those make a greater impact. Well, this is a really interesting reading, and something to keep in mind as you study Greek, as I study Greek, not only to be aware of what we see, but to be aware of how we hear it as well. Dr. Alex Loney, thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Oh, you're welcome, David.
Thanks, Alex. The Wheaton College faculty in biblical and classical languages are just excellent. You too can pick up the mantle and learn to read these languages and help the rest of us to read Scripture for all it's worth. In the show notes, you're going to find links to how you can get started at Wheaton College, whether you're interested in graduate or undergraduate courses. How many times do I need to say it? Get started today. Thanks to our team at the Lanier Theological Library and Learning Center for their help in producing this podcast. Thanks to John Lansma and his team at Wheaton College. Thanks to Phil Keggy for our intro and outro music. Until next time, my name is David Capes. Thanks for listening.